In our last video, we talked about the Italian Renaissance and some of the big changes that happened because of that. But Italy's not the only place that the Renaissance will really be affecting. We also see, kind of a little bit different, a Renaissance happening in the North. And here are some of the things we'll talk about in this video today. We'll look at the differences between the Italian and Northern Renaissances. We'll look at some of the particular artists and styles that developed, what Christian humanists are doing during this time, and then kind of finally, where does this leave Europe? We have this 10th grade advancement, but really, what's going to happen next? Let's establish first what we mean as the Northern Renaissance and how is that different, regionally from the Italian Renaissance. Well, the Northern Renaissance is taking place in northern countries. So, North Europe, which is like the Alps, it's Germany, France, England, some of the Low Countries, which are places like Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. And then also, this includes the Polish Renaissance. Then let's look at how it spreads. So it's going to spread through some of the normal things like trade and merchants, different ambassadors that are traveling to Italy. But it's also going to spread by some of these new Renaissance things. So things like patronage, the idea that wealthy families see other wealthy families with all of this intense, rich art and culture through the university systems, through traveling artists, and kind of most importantly, it's going to be spreading through the printing press. These new ideas are going to get spread far and wide now that we have the availability to do that kind of in mass. But of course, as it spreads, it's going to take on some different kind of flair according to where it spreads to. So let's look at the comparison between Italian art and Northern Renaissance art. So remember, in Italy, we're looking at things that are like very classical in nature. We're looking at the study of anatomy. Things are simplified. You're kind of showing like the best version of yourself. That's kind of like what these images are meant to seem like. While as in the Northern Renaissance, we have a lot more realism. They're trying to get people and, scenes to look as lifelike and realistic as possible. And that might not always paint people in the best light. They want to look at daily life and religious subjects with symbolism, and they're looking more at personality rather than giving you kind of like a straightforward formal subject. So, for example, if you have like a big nose that looks kind of funny in your face, the Northern Renaissance artists are going to paint it just like you look. Whereas the Italian Renaissance artists are going to make it look, a little bit more Romanesque and they're going to kind of gloss over that feature. It's kind of like the Italian Renaissance people are putting a filter on it a little bit. So some more comparisons. The Northern Renaissance, it features a lot more everyday people rather than just nobility or, religious figures. They have a little bit different kind of like means of doing the art. So we see a lot of oil on wood instead of things like frescoes on walls. And we see that it's a lot more kind of like balanced on the Italian side, while the Northern side has a lot more complexity around it. Which at the heart of it kind of comes this new artistic style called mannerism that the Northern Renaissance is going to employ. They're going to use heightened scale, exaggerate the drama in their images, use a lot of submersion of detail to create a more emotional effect. So it's going to give more imaginative proportions, a lot of emotion and mysticism that's going to overpower the like classic style that you would see in more Italian Renaissance art. And you'll understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about once we start to look at these individual artists. We have three in particular that we're going to focus on for today. The first painter we'll look at is Jan van Eyck, who is a Flemish painter who's very early in this Renaissance movement. He's going to come a little bit before everybody else. And he is known for perfecting the oil painting, that oil on wood, and creating a sense of realism in his paintings. His work is full of symbolism. He uses a lot of rich, kind of like gemstone colors. So you see here, just this painting compared to the Renaissance ones we looked at earlier, it's much darker. These people are much more realistic. You would never see a, Italian Renaissance painting with a face quite like the one of the man in the picture. He does a lot of kind of like elements in there that show symbolism of love, loyalty, marriage, faith, things like that. But you can kind of see just the difference in the texture and the style of this compared to the Italian Renaissance, which is so much more light and airy. Up next, we have Rembrandt, who's a member of the Dutch Golden Age, and he's also considered one of the great Dutch humanists. He's known for his dramatic use of light and shadow and the realistic portrayal of people's emotions and the complexity of the human experience. He tries to show that people, have a lot of depth to them. They're not perfect. And that's really reflected in a lot of his art. He also um, displays a lot of naturalism in his work, and he reflects the cultural and kind of spiritual introspection of the Dutch Golden Age. So he's going to be somebody that people use as a model for quite a while during this time period. Then the last artist we'll talk about today is Pieter Bruegel the Elder, who is a Flemish painter during the Northern Renaissance. He specializes in genre paintings that are populated by peasants or landscape elements. And his work is a marked shift away from the religious themes used during the Renaissance period. And he instead looks a lot at everyday life. He offers a rare and valuable window into what people actually experience in 16th century rural society. And often they were kind of seen as a witty, satirical element to them. He is known for advocating for Christianity outside the Catholic faith, which is also going to be a pretty big deal at this time. Now that we've seen a few different examples of the Northern Renaissance art style, let's look at a direct comparison between the Italian and the Northern Renaissance. I mean, you can see the Italian Renaissance, it's very idealized. I mean, you got a whole six-pack ab over there compared to this guy, with the very bland face on the right. Um, Lots of light elements, lots of religious elements in that Italian Renaissance. And then the Northern Renaissance has those dark jewel tones that, give it a more kind of everyday, realistic perspective. So you can see very different styles. Which then brings us to our Christian humanists. So remember, the Renaissance isn't just about art, it's also about the cultural aspects that go along with that. If you remember, early Christian humanists, they're known for that revival of the Greek, Roman, Latin, all of that learning, the classical learning. And the Northern Renaissance humanists, they're going to also study those classic texts, just like Italian humanists. They go back to really early Christianity and they want to make sure that humanism has that Christian content. And they're really trying to go back to more kind of original framing around the Bible and other Christian works. They want to see moral reform within the church that they already have. They see it as more of an individual and institutional church that they could create. They want to combine Christian ideas with those classic ideas and kind of keep them together. They're a little bit less worried about kind of the secular nature of humanism than the Italian Renaissance people were. One of the most influential humanists during his time is going to be this man named Erasmus, who is famous for his educational and religious reforms. And his writing makes clear that he believes that loyal Catholics wanted major reforms in the church. And that by going back and reading, these biblical texts in Greek or Latin, that whatever their original language was, that you can better understand what it really says rather than relying on a text that's been translated, five times over and that's lost the original intent. So he personally creates new editions of Greek and another Latin edition of the New Testament to kind of back this up. He writes this book called The Praise of Folly that really advocates for the idea that faith should be based on inner piety rather than external rituals, which, as you can imagine, the Catholic Church is not too happy about. So even though he is this devout Catholic that's really advocating for humanism in Catholicism, most of his works end up being on the Catholic Church's index of forbidden books, which is just, kind of sad for his legacy. But he really lays the foundation for a lot of intellectual reforms in religion coming up here in the next era. Which brings us to our second Christian humanist, Thomas More, who is an English humanist. And Thomas More also sees that humanist values have a place in the current Catholic Church. He writes this book called Utopia, which is a conservative criticism of contemporary society. He uses satire to critique the social, political, and religious practices of his time and kind of the abuses he sees going on in the church. And he has this idea that they could reimagine this utopia, this society based on reason, justice, and communal values that are rooted in Christian ethics. And he believes that reform is needed. And he's a close advisor of King Henry VIII of England, but ultimately kind of runs into this big roadblock with him because he does not believe that they need to create this whole new church to achieve those values. While Henry VIII, wants that divorce. So he decides to break from the Catholic Church and become the head of the Church of England. He creates his own church. And Thomas More just can't reconcile that. And so he actually chooses to become a martyr and is killed under Henry VIII because he doesn't want to acknowledge Henry as the new head of the church. But the work he leaves behind is really a big part of his legacy. Just these texts and these ideas that you should be putting more of these Christian humanist values into an already existing religious system. So what's next and where does this leave us? We have all this new art and expression that leads to more questioning of traditional power sources, aka the Catholic Church. And we have some new monarchies that are coming in to shake things up. And they also kind of agree that maybe this traditional power structure isn't the best fit for us anymore. So art and culture kind of stepping hand in hand with political aspirations of the time. And that's all we've got for today. Thanks for watching our video about the